It's hard to change mentalities. It takes time. Sometimes it's impossible. But we have to change on the right. I'm 41 years old. My entire life, looking back on it now, well, entire life politically, whenever I got involved, what conservatism has been is pointing out the hypocrisy of the communists. It's always the hypocrisy. Can you imagine if the right did this? That has gotten us nowhere. You're assigning your value system to them, and they don't have your value system at all. They don't care about being labeled hypocrites. We have to become smarter and better. And one of the people I've discovered out there, sharp as can be, that is much better at this than the traditional GOP, is Auron MacIntyre. His Substack is outstanding. It's called The Total State. He also was on YouTube. Highly recommend checking that out before he gets banned, which I'm sure is coming. Auron, okay, there's some nut job named Nina Turner. She talked about reparations. I don't expect people to care who she is, nor does it matter. But that prompted you to go on a lengthy discussion about the right. You take it away. They're your thoughts, not mine.
Well, absolutely. Nina is a senior fellow at some kind of institute that's about race and power, and she loves to tweet about reparations. She does it all the time. And of course, conservatives look at this kind of rhetoric and they say, oh, this is ridiculous. This makes no sense. It's not logical. It doesn't work. But of course, that's the opposite of true. Actually, this rhetoric is very powerful. It's very effective. And this is why the left beats the right all the time in this kind of contest, because the left understands that this is not a discussion about the minutia, the details. They understand that this is about power, acquiring power, maintaining power, setting the tone and the tenor of the discussion, setting the topics of the discussion. And so Nina doesn't care if conservatives come back with all the little things about why reparations aren't possible. Nina probably doesn't even care if at the end of the day, individual people get cut reparations checks, because she understands that the real key is making sure that people are talking about what she wants them to talk about. And by asking the big asking for the big things, anchoring the discussion in her territory, she knows at the end of the day, she's winning.
Yeah, playing the left's game on the left's field with the left's referees, enforcing the left's rules all the time. I complain about that all the time. Why don't we do it? Why doesn't the Overton window ever shift back our way? Why isn't there a gigantic GOP bill sailing through the House, or at least in committee right now, that deals with every issue we care about, from guns to abortion to taxes and the border? Ask for it all, maybe you get a little. Why don't we have that mentality? What's wrong with us?
Well, there are a bunch of different reasons, but one of them is that the right is thinking about governance, while again, the left is thinking about the acquisition of power. And so while the right is thinking about the practical nuts and bolts of how something gets done and how much is going to get spent on it and how you're going to justify that, all these different things, the left understands that what they want to do is make those big asks, those big moves. And then if they end up getting met halfway, it's still a big victory. The right still has this problem. Whenever you hear people on the right start to use more bombastic language to ask for bigger things, the people on the right get scared. No. We have to play it safe. Politics is the art of the possible. You have to make sure to make reasonable requests of the people. But that's not what Nina's doing. She's making the big ask. And then when she gets most of what she wants, but not all of it, does she celebrate that? No, she complains, right? Because at the end of the day, she knows she needs to drive the conversation even further her direction. She's setting up a patronage network. She knows that individual people are not going to get checks for reparations, but guess who are going to get checks? The government organizations that are aligned with her, the government programs, the NGOs that are going to service the people that she expects to vote for her policies, vote for the people that she wants, and keep them in power.
One of the things the right loves to talk about, and they love to talk about this, is the Constitution. The Constitution, it's not constitutional. The Constitution, they love it as if it's some kind of paper shield that will protect them from the communists in any way. You have a great piece up on the Total State right now about how they just simply worked around it, or frankly worked through it sometimes. Explain.
Well, the problem that we have when we look at our Constitution is that many people in America thought that basically because we've set up kind of this perfect document, and we've kind of exalted that document as something that will do all the work for us. We were very smart. We took human nature into account. We created this beautiful system. And don't get me wrong, there are many great things, of course, about the American Constitution. But because we put all the weight on the Constitution itself, it was very easy for the left to move around, to exploit the system, to get around those protections. We thought that by simply setting up the mechanisms of dividing the branches, separation of powers, interest will check interest, we thought that would keep our country safe and it would keep our values always kind of on top. But of course, that's not what happens, because a nation is not just a piece of paper. A nation is something much more. It's a culture, it's a people, it's a history, it's a tradition. And if we don't practice those things, if we don't keep those things in the forefront, then the words on the paper can be subverted piece by piece, bit by bit, to mean whatever the people who are in charge want them to mean. And so while we were busy, leaning on the Constitution to kind of keep our way of life constantly and a constant to protect our way of life, the left were busy changing the meaning of those words, changing the fundamental nature of the United States, and that allowed them to get around those protections that we expected to kind of last forever.
Auron, I'm constantly being told this by people on the right. I see it all the time. It's one of the things that makes me want to jump off a building when I hear people talk about how they're the silent majority. We're the silent majority. The numbers are with us. We're the silent majority. And I look and I see the leaders of every single cultural institution being a complete anti-American, frankly, communist piece of trash who's waging war on the country. And we're down here with no power at all, claiming to be the silent majority. Is that what got us? Did we think that numbers actually matter? Because that way of thinking drives me nuts.
Yeah, that is a huge problem. You hear this all the time, especially on the right. Well, that's just not what the majority of people believe. That's just not where this country is. Well, that's not what matters. Whether we like it or not, countries are dominated. They are run by organized minorities. It is the organized elite that will always have control over a country. Unfortunately, because again, the nature of our Constitution, we told ourselves that we had gotten away from that truth. That no, in America, it is always the people who are in charge. But unfortunately, that's just never going to be the case. You have to have people who care about your values, who are in power, who will protect you, protect your interests, protect your culture, and care about what America is. And because we were always under the impression that the government would have to be informed by popular opinion, we always kind of warmed ourselves. We had the security blanket of, at the end of the day, the average person, the normal person, doesn't think like this. Well, that's great, but the average person isn't in power. They aren't the people who are holding the keys to our institutions. They aren't the people who are making the rules. And as long as that's the case, just thinking that eventually at some point we're going to get this snapback where the American people will come back to the polls and change everything through the voting booth, we can see through the things that our government is doing right now that they are closing even those off ramps to kind of what's happening right now. And so I think that unfortunately that did end up being that kind of that security blanket that let us sleep on the fact that many people who hated us were now in control of the organs of power in the United States.
The elites in this society, it's not just that they're corrupt. I mean, elites in general are corrupt at some level anyway. It's that now the corruption is out in the open, it's naked, and they almost seem to enjoy rubbing our faces in it. I go back to the COVID stuff. I mean, there was all this complaining about how they're hypocrites, of course, that's what we called them, when they violated the COVID rules they gave to everyone else. But it wasn't really that. They just seemed to take a real joy in letting the peasants know there are two different systems of justice in this country, and they're not subject to any of them.
Yeah, that's right. The like you talked about in that Substack piece that I had, one of the things that was supposed to keep the growth of our government in check were these competing spheres of power. The fact that our society used to have many different things that the people were dedicated to. They were dedicated to family, they were dedicated to church, they were dedicated to community, and all these different organizations had to be kind of negotiated with if the government wanted to do anything. But kind of with the introduction of truly mass democracy, the manipulation of the public became the key thing that people used to kind of control the United States. And it broke down all those different social spheres that our government used to have to compete with. And now the people in charge are so used to being able to manipulate the public, change the rules, change the definitions at a moment's notice. They're getting really sloppy with it. They feel very secure in many ways in their power, but at the same time, they also feel a little bit exposed because of the fact that it is so naked. And so they're kind of walking this tightrope wire where they, in one sense, feel more powerful than they've ever felt before, but they do feel, I think, a little uncomfortable being exposed in this way. And I think this is why we're seeing them take kind of this clumsy authoritarian track. They want to look like an aristocracy, but they don't know how to look like an aristocracy. They don't know how to rule out in the open. And so they have this really ugly manifestation of this where they have this two-tiered justice system and they look down and sneer on the people who they see as below themselves.
Auron, his Substack is The Total State. Go check it out. Thank you, my brother. I appreciate it.